We're in Cumbernauld, which is northeast of Glasgow on the way to Stirling. Well, we're pretty exposed because we're at 400 feet here, so and we're faced really into the weather, so we get a lot of wild weather here. Well, we moved here, and I guess for a period of time we were quite happy with the house, but I guess one of the things that was obvious to us was that the house was the wrong way around, and that the living room was facing into the street, and we had this beautiful view behind us. So I guess that was part of the motivation. If we were going to stay here, that we wanted to change that, and we wanted to create a more satisfactory, a better living space where we really enjoyed, spending time. So in the area we're sitting right now, this was formerly the garden, and of course it has a really good view. You can see the horizon line, and that's about, I don't know, about 10 miles away. And so we knew about that opportunity was there. So it was a case of then finding a way, finding an architect to reorientate the house, and also with the existing house, which was actually divided into a living room and a dining room, was the opportunity actually to open that up and have a large dining room, because that was really important to us. The table was always significant. To be able to sit around that with family and friends, spend time, so that thinking this way gave us the opportunity to have the living room we wanted, but also to have a nice big dining room where we could host people. I guess the first thing was there was no science. I think that's been a big feature in terms of heating in this house and the problems that have existed. So this house was this particular room was always cool. So that was had actually initially there were some kick radiators that are normally used under kitchen units. There was a couple of them, but they were noisy. They were driven by hot water, but they were fan operated, so they were noisy. But even with them, this space was uncomfortable in the wintertime. At one point, we thought about the log burner, and that did make a big difference. When you put it on, it's a 7 kilowatt. It could raise the heat, but of course, mostly went upstairs. But it made it livable, but it was not the ideal solution. And then eventually came the crisis point where there was no heating upstairs because of a blockage, and really the solution there was no science to the solution. When I talked to people, it was generally just, let's add more of these, but without any idea. I was also interested in whether there were other types of solutions, so I wanted to understand whether I could do something to the fabric of the house without totally disrupting it. So I explored all of that. I guess that was the starting point, was to explore whether we could do into the fabric of the house, or add any more insulation. Neither of those actually were, well, we had enough insulation, but it was not really possible without making a major change to alter really the performance of the house in terms of its thermal performance. So therefore it was obviously the only thing we could do was to work on the central heating. And at the same time, obviously wanted to consider, was it possible to find a more eco solution? At the same time, were the two things possible? Well, I still work at home. I'm very active. I work as a leadership coach, and I work as a photographer. So I spend a lot of time in the house, and so therefore it's important that it's comfortable, that you're not going around cold. And mostly it was one, if not two, fleeces quite often. And if you're working online, which I do when I'm doing my coaching, you're very stationary, and so therefore you feel the cold, and people notice that you've got three fleeces on when you're coaching them. So not a great look. So really something had to happen. Living in this house is really dramatically different, because it probably was a bad version of what most people experience, which is these changes in temperature as you switch off and on the heating, where you're basically, I guess, you have a very warm radiator, but everything else is cold. The danger when your house doesn't function is that you retreat into one space that you heat. And I think it's a real shame. If you have a nice space that you've worked on, you want to be able to use it. And I think that was the difficult part, was this realization that you actually can't really live in the living room because it's too cold, or the bedroom.
So Robert came to us, he had issues with his heating. He had a boiler installed previously a couple of years before. The upstairs was not working at all. He had microboard pipework, the upstairs bedroom was 7 degrees, so lots of issues, and he was very hesitant about a heat pump with different technologies and what was available to him. So when I first visited this property, in the garage here behind me, there was a Bosch gas boiler and just a standard hot water cylinder. And then as we went round the house, it was apparent that he had 8mm microbore copper. Now that it can work in certain circumstances, but it was all we knew from upstairs being completely blocked. That stuff there was no good. It had to be ripped out, and he had previous quotes to get that took out. So it was like, right, okay, so we need to upgrade some radiators. We definitely need to upgrade some pipework. But then there was existing pipework that's buried in the right hand side of the house, which was underneath concrete. So all of that was a challenge when it comes to design.
I mean, I think obviously you do talk to friends, and I think the general level of knowledge is not that great apart from simple solutions. I think searching the web is particularly difficult. I think the reason for that is there are too many vested interests. Too many people have a point of view that it's really not based in science, or I would even say in professionalism. So for me, it was a case of I wanted to find out how could I find an independent advisor that wasn't selling something and didn't have a vested interest, who could advise me what was the right thing to do. And that was really the first protocol in this final process. But I think once I understood, the key, I think, piece of information was the size of radiators, or as they technically call it, emitters. I think that was a really big thing, the understanding of it. It was so obvious, but it wasn't so obvious because no one had ever mentioned it. Really, no one ever said that this could be better if you had bigger radiators. So that was really a starting point. And then there was this question: well, you could stay with a gas central heating and just change the radiators. But given the grant system, it made the consideration of it. I mean, I was always prepared to put money into it and not just to think it should be done for me. But in terms of the payback, it changed the payback period. And when you're older in life, maybe that's something you think about, right? Am I ever going to get any reasonable payback for it? So when we looked at all of that, the grants that were available, the really the potential of the solution, the fact, and also its eco performance, it was really became a straightforward decision. Having found the first people who did the consultancy work, and they recommend, of course, I felt when I listened to them and experienced them, so I used my own personal judgment. I felt I could trust them. These were decent people. They weren't advocating solutions that just suited them. They were actually taking my point of view and trying to solve my problem. And they recommended Sean and his company. And I would say on meeting him, I had the same experience as I'd had with the consultants. He really came from a non-biased point of view. He was trying to solve the problem. He understood that comfort was, we talked about that comfort was the first priority, really. That had to change because this was a difficult house to live in at times when it was cold. So that was really the main reason, was experiencing him and trusting your judgment. If you don't trust somebody, don't go with them. Find somebody you can trust, and find people who have an independent mind, and they're not just trying to sell you a solution that may not be best for you.
So when it comes to heat pumps, the water in heat pumps runs 4 times faster than, say, a gas boiler, and it runs a narrower DT. So that needs to be taken into consideration, what pipes are currently in the property. So the smaller the pipework, the harder it is, resistance that you need to push that water through. But don't forget, heat pump runs on electricity, and the pump inside it runs on electricity. So the more that has to push, the more electricity you're going to use. So it's a factor we'll take into consideration. So if you've got really, really small microbore, so we are very unfortunate in Scotland, a lot of the housing stock here has got 8mm microbore, right? And the heat pump will struggle to get through that. In certain circumstances, if there's a low heat load, say upstairs, you can get away with leaving some of it in, right? But we'll always advise to try and get rid of most of that. If you've got, say, 10mm microbore plastic pipework, I can use that, right? But that all depends on the heat pump and the head of the heat pump, how much pressure that heat pump or the pump inside it can actually deliver. So some heat pumps are better than others. So it's about choosing the right kit for the job. So when I first visit a property, I can make an educated guess to myself, which I won't tell the customer what I think the heat loss will be, right? And that's just based on previous jobs, right? But ultimately, I don't know what that heat loss is. I have to do what's called a room by room heat loss calculation. So yeah, we can do an estimate. We've got some software that will maybe give us an indication, but really what you need to do is you need to go room by room. You need to scan it, 3D scan it. You need to measure every window, every radiator, the thickness of the walls, what's inside the walls, the insulation in the walls, what's underneath the floor. Everything needs to be scanned and it needs to be took into consideration. And then once we've got the heat loss for each individual room, then we'll size the radiators. Once we've sized the radiators, then we'll size the pipework. Once that's done, then we size the heat pump. The heat pump's the last thing in the line to be sized. This here is probably one of my favourite heat pumps, right? This is the Panasonic 9 kilowatt TCAP M-Series, right? So what that TCAP means is this keeps total capacity. So most heat pumps in the market will have a drop in capacity the colder it gets. This just stays 9 kilowatts all the way down to -20. It's absolutely brilliant. And you're getting scopes of 500% efficiency. It's honestly one of the best heat pumps on the market. And the pump on it is so good. It's perfect for houses with microbore. And that's why I love it so much. And that's why it's in this house.
Clearly, when you choose to work with somebody, that's really important because you're going to invite them into your home, and your home is your safe space. It's a very psychologically very important place for people. So when you invite people into, and I do that thoughtfully, I won't invite just anybody in. I think I knew that Sean was like that. He also talked about his experience and the fact that he had worked in, project managed as well as having a technical background. He also had this kind of project management, and you need both. Yeah, it's not enough for somebody to be technically good at their job. They have to be organized. They have to be able to organize other people. They have to be able to organize materials. So it was a sense of having trust in that. If you've worked for a big hotel firm and you've managed their refit and refurb projects, you know what you're doing. And just his whole manner of the way that he behaved. And I would say that's exactly what happened in the installation. I was really nervous. The house is really important. It's a house that we've worked on the aesthetic of the house. So it's that being honoured and people respecting your space. And I would say that was totally the experience. In fact, I was a bit shocked actually at how much Sean was able to achieve and how he would just ask people to do things again. If he didn't like the way it was done, then he would ask them to do it again. Very respectfully, but it was non-negotiable. As somebody who works in the kind of leadership area, that's what I'm looking for in people that do work, is that they're in control, they're managing, they're taking responsibility. And that's most certainly what Sean did. Part of the work was to lift up the floor on the upstairs because there was no heating and it was legacy microbore pipe, and that had to be done. And that was the bit I was really nervous about because it's wooden floors. But Sean did that himself. He did that part himself because he wanted to make sure that it was done properly. And it was done with the minimum of fuss and the minimum of disturbance. He put everything back the way he found it. I can't speak highly enough of him in terms of that. And the care continues. He still texts me to ask me how things are going. And when I have a little problem about maybe forgetting how to operate something, he'll explain it to me. He has so much to bring to the situation, not just his technical solution, the ability to work out what the heat loss is, what you need to put in terms of heat output, the kind of various technologies that are available. He manages the whole project. He manages his material. He manages the people. So the real difference now is this even temperature, which in a sense, I still haven't got used to even months down the line. When you get out of bed in the morning, it's not cold. It's even temperature. When you walk down the stairs to get your coffee in the morning, which is a really important moment for me, it's an even temperature. And you haven't put on all your layers and layers and layers of clothes. You just walk around the house I walk around the house, all I have is a shirt on there. I don't need to wear a fleece anymore. So it's dramatically different.
So this heat pump here, we've already been looking at the figures. It is running around about 430% efficiency. The temperature last week was -5. The flow temperature on this was sitting at 43 degrees and it was 20.5 degrees inside. Robert was like over the moon by how comfortable his house is. Completely solved that problem for him where the house was freezing. So like it's on just now. Can you hear it? Bad weather, right? Last week, -5. Text Robert, how was the heating this morning? And he's like, Sean, it's absolutely brilliant. Kicking about in my shorts and t-shirts on my bare feet. Two years ago, that was just a dream. I was sitting there in a hoodie, or I was upstairs with an electric blanket. So that tells me it's working perfect. Also, I can log in to all of my heat pumps on the back end. At -5, this was sitting at a 43-degree flow temp, and the design of it was -4, but I had set it to 45, so it's outperforming my design.
So having a even heated house in which every room is heated, I think to me that's a basic right for people. And it can be done if people do their job properly.